For over a decade, I had lived in the quiet, picturesque neighborhood of Willow Creek. It was the kind of place that seemed to exist in a postcard: spacious lots, tree-lined streets, and a tight-knit community that prided itself on its blend of rural charm and suburban convenience. My home was my sanctuary, a place where I could enjoy the best of both worlds, the peace of the countryside and the amenities of modern living. But there was one thing that made my life in Willow Creek truly complete: my tractor. It wasn't just any tractor. It was a rugged, dependable machine that had been my loyal companion through every season. In the winter, it was my lifeline, clearing snow from my driveway and helping my neighbors do the same. In the summer, it kept my property in pristine condition, mowing the lawn, tilling the garden, and hauling firewood. It was more than a tool. It was an extension of my independence, a symbol of self-reliance in a world that often felt too dependent on others. But as with most idyllic suburban paradises, there was a catch. The Willow Creek Homeowners Association, HOA, a group of well-meaning but increasingly power-hungry individuals, had slowly but surely transformed into a bureaucratic nightmare. What had started as a way to maintain the neighborhood's aesthetic appeal had devolved into a regime of micromanagement, petty rules, and endless fines. And at the helm of this madness was Margaret Hayes. Margaret, or Maggie as she insisted on being called, was the HOA president. She had held the position for 3 years, and in that time, she had turned the association into her personal fiefdom. Maggie was the kind of person who thrived on control. She had a knack for enforcing the most trivial rules with an iron fist, all while maintaining a saccharine smile that made her seem benevolent. But beneath that polished exterior was a woman who relished the power she wielded over her neighbors. The rules she imposed were asinine. You couldn't have a shed unless it matched the trim color of your house. You couldn't leave your trash cans out for more than 2 hours after pickup. And don't even get me started on the Christmas decorations ban. But the rule that truly pushed me over the edge was the one that targeted my tractor. It arrived in the mail one crisp autumn morning, a letter from the HOA, printed on official letterhead and signed by Maggie herself. The subject line read, "Prohibition of heavy machinery on residential property." I stared at the letter in disbelief. My tractor, which had been parked in my driveway for years without issue, was now deemed a violation of HOA guidelines. According to Maggie, it was an eyesore, a hazard, and, most absurdly, unnecessary. The letter gave me 30 days to remove it from my property or face a fine of $100 per week. If I refused to comply, the fines would escalate, and eventually, the HOA could place a lien on my home. I was furious. My tractor wasn't just a piece of equipment, it was a necessity. Without it, my driveway would be impassable during winter storms, and my neighbors, many of whom relied on me to clear their driveways, would be stranded. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting to plead my case, convinced that a little common sense would prevail. The meeting was held in the neighborhood clubhouse, a modest building that was supposed to serve as a gathering place for community events. Instead, it had become the stage for Maggie's power trips. I arrived early, taking a seat in the back of the room with my arms crossed, waiting for my turn to speak. Maggie entered the room with her usual flair, dressed in a tailored blazer and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was flanked by her loyal vice president, Greg, a man who seemed to have no opinions of his own and simply nodded along with whatever Maggie said. The meeting began with the usual formalities: minutes from the last meeting, budget updates, and a discussion about the upcoming holiday decorations ban. Then, finally, it was my turn to speak. I stood up, took a deep breath, and addressed the room. My tractor is not an eyesore. I began, my voice steady but firm. It's not a hazard. And more importantly, it's necessary. Without it, my driveway and several of my neighbors' driveways would be completely inaccessible during winter storms. The HOA's snowplow service is unreliable at best, and we can't afford to wait for them to show up when we're buried under 3 feet of snow. Maggie listened with that infuriatingly condescending smile of hers. When I finished, she leaned forward, her hands clasped neatly on the table. "I understand your concerns," she said, her tone dripping with faux sympathy. "But the board has decided that heavy machinery, including tractors, does not align with the aesthetic of our community. We have a snowplow service for the roads, so private equipment is unnecessary." "Unnecessary?" I shot back, my temper flaring. "Tell that to the elderly couple down the street who rely on me to clear their driveway every year. Tell that to the single mom who wouldn't be able to get her car out after a major snowfall. My tractor is already here, and it's been here for years without issue. Why is it suddenly a problem? Greg, ever the echo, chimed in. The rule is the rule. If we make exceptions, then everyone will want to bend the guidelines. And just like that, the HOA voted. My tractor was banned. I had 30 days to remove it or face the consequences. Winter came fast that year, and at first, it was mild. A few flurries here and there, nothing major. The HOA was smug, acting like they had made the right decision. But then, in early January, the weather reports started to change. Meteorologists warned that a historic blizzard was on the way. We weren't talking about a few inches of snow. We were talking about multiple feet, high winds, and dangerously low temperatures. A storm like this wasn't just inconvenient, it was paralyzing. Despite the warnings, the HOA remained confident that their tiny plow service would be enough. They sent out an email reminding residents that personal snow-clearing equipment was unnecessary and that we should be patient. But the storm didn't care about HOA policies. When it hit hard. Within hours, the roads disappeared under feet of snow. Power lines snapped under the weight of ice, and the entire town was thrown into chaos. By the next morning, everything was frozen solid. People were trapped inside their homes. Cars were buried. And that plow service the HOA was so proud of? Nowhere to be found. Panic set in. Neighbors started calling each other, trying to figure out a solution. Some tried shoveling their driveways, but the snow was too deep. The HOA's plan of waiting it out quickly collapsed. And then, the calls started coming in. I was sitting in my living room, sipping coffee and enjoying the warmth of my generator-powered home, when I heard the first knock. I opened the door to see Greg standing there, bundled up like a kid on his first snow day. His face was tight with barely contained embarrassment. "Hey," he said, clearing his throat. We could use some help." I raised an eyebrow. "Help with what?" Greg shuffled his feet, his pride visibly crumbling. "The roads, the driveways. Maggie's house is completely snowed in. The plows aren't coming. We need your tractor." I took a long sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. "You mean the tractor the HOA banned?" Greg winced. "Yeah, that one." I leaned against the door frame, letting him stew in his own words. "Oh, I'd love to help," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "But you see, my tractor isn't stored here anymore. HOA rules and all. But hey, good luck with that storm." And with that, I shut the door in his face. The storm had only just begun, but the HOA's reign of terror was already crumbling. Over the next few days, as I used my tractor to clear the roads and rescue my neighbors, the community began to rally together. People who had once supported Maggie's ridiculous rules were now questioning her leadership. A petition started circulating, calling for her removal as HOA president. By the time the storm passed, Maggie's power was gone. The neighborhood had come together in a way I had never seen before, and the HOA was forced to reverse its policies. My tractor was no longer banned, and the fines I had been forced to pay were refunded. Maggie, humiliated and defeated, eventually moved out of the neighborhood. But the real victory wasn't just about the tractor. It was about the community. For the first time in years, Willow Creek felt like a place where people cared about each other, where neighbors helped neighbors instead of reporting them for minor infractions. And as for me, well, I had a feeling that no one was ever going to question my tractor again. The blizzard had left Willow Creek in shambles. Even after the snow stopped falling, the neighborhood was still buried under layers of ice and snow. The roads were barely passable, power lines were down, and many homes were without heat. The storm had exposed the fragility of our community's infrastructure and the incompetence of the HOA's leadership. But it had also revealed something else: the resilience and strength of the people who called Willow Creek home. As I drove my tractor through the snow-covered streets, clearing driveways and rescuing stranded neighbors, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The same people who had once turned a blind eye to Maggie's tyranny were now stepping up to help each other. The storm had forced us to come together, and in doing so, it had shattered the illusion of control that Maggie and her cronies had held over us. But the work was far from over. The storm had caused significant damage, and many residents were still struggling. Elderly neighbors were trapped in freezing homes, families were running out of food, and some houses had burst pipes, turning basements into icy swamps. It was clear that clearing the roads wasn't enough. If we were going to survive the aftermath of the storm, we needed a full-scale rescue operation. Chapter 7. The Neighborhood Rallies. I sent a message in the neighborhood group chat. All right, folks. The roads are clear, but we've still got a lot of people in trouble. If you have power, heat, or extra supplies, let's start helping our neighbors. Who needs assistance? Within minutes, the responses flooded in. My grandmother's stuck in her house, and she's running low on medicine. Can someone help? I've got food, but no heat. Can anyone take my family in? We lost power, and my dad's oxygen machine isn't working. We need to get him somewhere safe. It was heartwarming to see how quickly the neighborhood mobilized. Bill, the guy who had helped start the petition against Maggie, offered his home as a temporary warming shelter. A couple of other neighbors volunteered their houses as well. People with four-wheel drive vehicles started carpooling, picking up stranded residents and bringing them to warm houses. For the first time in years, Willow Creek actually felt like a community. But there were still some major problems. The local emergency services were overwhelmed, and the town's main roads were still clogged. First responders couldn't reach us, which meant we had to handle things ourselves. Some of the elderly residents were completely cut off. Their front doors were blocked by snow, and even though I had cleared the roads, they still couldn't get out. That's when I had an idea. I sent out another message. I've got the tractor. If anyone knows of someone who's trapped in their house, let me know. I'll start clearing doorways and driveways. My phone exploded with responses. I started with Frank, the elderly man who had asked to warm up at my place the night before. His house was almost entirely buried. I had to use the tractor just to make a path to his front porch. When I finally cleared the last of the snow, he stepped out, bundled up in layers, shaking his head. "Son," he said, clapping me on the shoulder, "if I had a daughter, I'd make her marry you." I laughed. "Appreciate it, Frank. You good to get to Bill's house for heat?" He nodded. "Already packed a bag." From there, I went house to house, plowing through snowbanks, freeing trapped families, and making paths for people to evacuate safely. One house had a pregnant woman who had been stuck inside for 2 days with no power. When I finally got to her front door, her husband nearly hugged me. "Dude," he said, "I was this close to breaking a window and climbing out." Another house had a family with a newborn baby. They had been wrapping the baby in layers of blankets, but their house had dropped below freezing. I cleared their driveway and personally drove them to one of the warmed-up homes. Everywhere I went, people were offering help, sharing supplies, and looking out for one another. Even Greg, the former HOA vice president, tried to get involved. He came up to me, rubbing his hands together. "So, what can I do?" he asked. I smirked. "You got a shovel?" "Yeah." "Great," I said, gesturing to a snowed-in house. "Start digging." To my surprise, he actually did it. Maybe even he had finally realized that Maggie's power-hungry nonsense wasn't worth it. By the end of the day, we had rescued over a dozen families, moved everyone into homes with heat, and gotten a few of the most vulnerable folks to a nearby shelter that had emergency power. Just when I thought we were done, another message popped up. "There's a family trapped in their house at the end of the cul-de-sac. They have no phone signal. Someone just saw them waving from the window." That part of the street had the worst snowdrifts. Even the tractor struggled against the sheer weight of the ice and snow. But I pushed through. When I got to the house, sure enough, a woman and 2 kids were standing at the window, waving frantically. The father was trying to force the front door open, but it wouldn't budge. I jumped out of the tractor and started shoveling by hand. After a few minutes, the dad managed to shove the door open just enough to squeeze through. His eyes were wide with relief. "We thought we were stuck for days," he said. "I didn't know how much longer we could last." "You're not alone," I told him. "Let's get you out of here." I drove them to Bill's house, where a warm meal and a working heater were waiting. By the time the town finally got around to plowing our roads 2 days later, the crisis was already over. We had saved ourselves. Chapter 8. Maggie's Downfall. The funny thing was, this whole time, Maggie hadn't lifted a finger. She had spent the entire ordeal holed up in her house, only emerging once everything was already back to normal. When she finally did come outside, I was finishing up plowing the last bit of snow in front of my house. She walked up to me, her arms crossed. "I suppose you expect me to thank you," she said. I smiled. "Nope." Her lips pressed together. She looked around, realizing that her power over this neighborhood was officially gone. No one was listening to her anymore. I climbed onto my tractor, looking down at her. But I do expect you to move out soon. She scowled. You're insufferable. I revved the engine. And you're unemployed. Then I rolled away, leaving her standing there in the snow. With Maggie gone, the neighborhood felt stronger than ever. The new HOA board, led by Bill, wasted no time in rolling back many of the ridiculous rules Maggie had put in place. The fines for personal equipment were abolished, and the community even voted to purchase a brand new tractor for emergency snow removal. Guess who they asked to operate it? Look, man, Bill said to me at the next meeting, we all saw what you did for the neighborhood. If you're willing, we'd love for you to be in charge of snow clearing from now on. I grinned. As long as I get to park the tractor right in my driveway. Bill laughed. Deal. That winter, I cleared the roads without having to fight the HOA. Neighbors thanked me instead of fining me. And for the first time in years, our community felt like a community again. Chapter 10, Karen's Final Farewell. A few months after Maggie moved out, I noticed something interesting in the neighborhood. A real estate sign had gone up in her yard. She was selling her house. The news spread like wildfire. No way she's actually leaving, someone wrote in the group chat. Best thing that's happened to this neighborhood in years. Of course, I couldn't resist having a little fun. The night before her moving trucks arrived, I made a special delivery. I took my tractor and plowed a massive snowbank in front of her for sale sign. It was completely buried. I made sure it was packed and tight so she'd have to dig it out by hand. The next morning, as she stomped outside in her signature fury, she took one look at the massive pile of snow and screamed. I watched from my window, sipping my coffee, as she hacked at the ice with a plastic snow shovel, getting nowhere. She must have spent hours out there before finally giving up and calling a removal service. And you know what? She deserved every second of it. Once Maggie was gone, the neighborhood finally felt like home again. People were actually talking to each other instead of just worrying about who was going to get reported for some minor infraction. The new HOA actually listened to the community instead of making up nonsense rules. And the best part? The HOA bought a brand new community tractor for emergency snow removal. Guess who they asked to be the one to operate it? Yep, me. Bill approached me at the next meeting. Look, man, he said, rubbing the back of his neck, we all saw what you did for the neighborhood. And we were thinking, if you're willing, we'd love for you to be in charge of snow clearing from now on. I grinned. As long as I get to park the tractor right in my driveway. Bill laughed. Deal. That winter, I cleared the roads without having to fight the HOA. Neighbors thanked me instead of fining me. And for the first time in years, our community felt like a community again. A few months after Maggie moved out, I was out mowing my lawn when I saw a moving truck pull up to her old house. A young couple stepped out, looking excited to be in their new home. I wandered over, leaning against my fence. New neighbors? I asked. The man smiled. Yeah, we just bought the place. Moving in today. The woman looked around, taking in the scenery. It's so nice here, she said. Everyone seems so friendly. I laughed. Oh, you have no idea. Then, right as I was about to introduce myself properly, I noticed something glorious. The couple walked over to the moving truck, and from the back, the movers pulled out a brand new, bright green John Deere tractor. I nearly fell over laughing. The guy noticed my reaction and grinned. Yeah, we heard about the big snowstorm last winter. Decided to buy this baby just in case. I wiped a tear from my eye. Oh man, if you only knew how perfect that is. They raised an eyebrow, clearly confused. I just shook my head. Don't worry. You'll find out. Welcome to the neighborhood. Months passed, and before I knew it, winter was creeping back in. But this time, there was no panic, no arguing, no ridiculous HOA meetings about approved snow removal policies. Nope, this time we were ready. The first snowfall of the season came in fast. Not as bad as last year's blizzard, but enough to cause trouble. The difference? Within an hour, my tractor was out, joined by our second plow. Volunteers were already clearing the sidewalks. Neighbors were outside, laughing, drinking hot coffee, and helping each other dig out driveways. Instead of a neighborhood full of people waiting helplessly, we were taking care of our own. At one point, Bill walked up beside me, watching as we cleared the road. Crazy how much things have changed, huh? He said. I smirked. Crazy how easy it was once we got rid of the dead weight. He laughed. Amen to that. And as I drove my tractor through the streets, clearing paths that no one could find me for, I realized something. For the first time in years, this neighborhood actually felt like home. And Maggie? She was just a bad memory, buried under the same snow she once swore we didn't need a tractor for. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.